The Russian official media is beginning to sound perilous for Vladimir Putin, which is something I never thought I'd say. Not because of the hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers who have been killed or injured. It is due to something far more commonplace than the crippling Western sanctions that have wreaked havoc on the economy. Gas shortages are a problem that affects every Russian's day-to-day existence. Drivers are arriving at vacant stations all around Russia. School buses are not moving. Tractors cannot be fueled by farmers. Additionally, on live television, the same reporters who formerly extolled Putin are now publicly stating that if this keeps up, his regime may fall. For the first time in many years, Russia's propaganda apparatus is showing signs of weakness. And something even more hazardous is hiding beneath those fissures: rumors that Putin himself would be replaced. Let's begin with the scene that stunned Russian viewers. A furious dispute erupted between Kremlin-approved analysts on primetime television. They questioned the entire story of the alleged special military operation rather than applauding the triumph. One panelist brought out a straightforward fact. The war has continued for more than 1,300 days, which is more time than the fabled conflict against Nazi Germany, the Great Patriotic War. Another pointed out the obvious and questioned Russia's own Ministry of Defense figures. Ukraine wouldn't have an army if it had actually lost 2 million soldiers. This was remarkable for a system based on unwavering allegiance. These bloggers weren't banished or dissidents. They were Putin's own employees who had been paid to convey his message, and now they dared to question it. Furthermore, moral anger was not the cause of that change. It resulted from a fear of what was going on within Russia. Because another crisis is brewing at home while the war rages in Ukraine. Gas stations are running out of fuel in areas like Nizhny, Novgorod, Rostov, and even Russian-occupied Crimea. Because there is no fuel, parents are informed that school buses are unable to pick up their children. In order to save lives, ambulances ration gasoline. During harvest season, farmers observe crops rotting in the fields while parking their tractors. Journalists interview irate drivers who spend hours looking for gas while traveling the highways. Deliveries have been absent from some stations for weeks. Others impose exorbitant fees that the average Russian cannot afford. Over 50% of petrol stations in Crimea report being totally empty, almost 40% in the southern districts. Stations are shutting down pumps or stating that there is no fuel available, even in Moscow, the jewel in the crown of the Kremlin. This goes beyond simple discomfort. Fuel is essential to survival in Russia, a nation that depends on long-distance trucking, railroads, and agriculture. Without it, day-to-day existence starts to fall apart. Why is this occurring now, then? Accidents are blamed by the Kremlin. However, we are aware of the true nature of those mishaps. Drone attacks by Ukraine. Ukraine has been using drones not just on the battlefield, but also deep within Russia's energy infrastructure since the summer. At least 16 of Russia's 38 largest oil refineries have been damaged, many of them more than once. Storage tanks catch fire. Pipelines blow up. Refineries close for several weeks. As a result, Russia's capacity to convert crude oil into usable diesel and gasoline has collapsed. Since the outbreak, exports have fallen to their lowest point ever. There is a shortage of household necessities. Additionally, every drone strike directly targets Putin's war chest for a government that depends on oil revenue to support its operations. This is when everything becomes surreal, though. Rather than acknowledge the issue, the Kremlin enacted a new law. Ordinary Russians are no longer allowed to record or distribute pictures of drone strike damage. Think about that for a second. The issue is not resolved by the government. It prohibits discussion of it. That is directly from the Soviet model. However, modern Russia is hyper-connected, in contrast to the USSR of the 1980s. Telegram channels are buzzing, social media breaches occur, satellite photos are shared globally, and people can observe firsthand as grocery prices rise or petrol stations close. The truth that your automobile won't start because there is no petrol in the tank cannot be concealed by any amount of censoring, and the strain on the economy is only getting worse. Putin assured Russians on national television a few weeks ago that he would never raise taxes due to the war. Rather, he claimed that raising production and efficiency was the answer. Here's the issue, though. Drones from Ukraine just destroyed that production. Refineries are unable to function. Pipelines are at risk. Additionally, Russia's budget deficit is growing daily. What then did Putin do? That's exactly what all dictators do when they're surrounded. He didn't keep his word. Currently, the finance ministry is proposing to increase Russia's value-added tax, or VAT, from 20% to 22%. Although it may not seem like much, it affects every customer purchase. Food, clothing, and medications are all more costly. The average Russian family's life becomes intolerable when you combine shortages, inflation, and rising interest rates. The ones who are suffering are the very individuals Putin promised to protect. Furthermore, citizens are not the only ones that are betrayed. The Kremlin once pledged subsidies to refineries and oil corporations in order to maintain low pricing. The concept was straightforward. They would be compensated by the government to maintain low prices for domestic fuel while continuing to make money from exports overseas. But now that funds are running low, the government has discreetly stopped providing those benefits. Businesses are incensed. Additionally, the knives frequently come out when Russia's oligarchs lose money. In the meantime, Russian authorities are inexplicably losing favor. Despite shooting himself 6 times in the back of the head, a St. Petersburg official who was charged with fraud was found dead in what the authorities described as a suicide. The government's coffers unexpectedly contain billions of stolen rubles. Once a billionaire, another prominent judge in Moscow has been accused of corruption and removed from office. His confiscated fortune was probably used to fill budget gaps. This is the typical pattern of a failed government. When finances are tight, allies turn into foes and loyalty wanes. This leads us back to the most shocking development: rumors that Putin might be replaced. Dmitry Stazin, a journalist who was once given a medal by Putin himself for her coverage of Crimea, is now cautioning on state television that gasoline shortages may cause the system to collapse. Consider that. Putin handpicked and rewarded a Kremlin propagandist who is now on TV publicly stating what the majority of Russians only mumble in private. He might be brought down by this issue. Not for ethical or democratic reasons, but rather because stability has always been the deal in Russia. Putin pledged national pride, stable incomes, order, and reasonably priced fuel. The silence ends as soon as that agreement is broken. And this is nothing new. Tanks and missiles did not bring down the Soviet Union in the late 1980s. Bread lines, empty shelves, shortages, and an administration that insisted everything was okay, but the people knew it wasn't, were the things that brought it down. The system fell apart when faith did. Russians are beginning to notice the same flaws today. In Ukraine, propaganda claims victory, but coffins reveal otherwise. Although cars wait in lineups that go on for miles, state TV maintains that fuel supplies are steady. There is a growing gap between what individuals are taught and what they actually experience. Additionally, revolutions start there. What comes next then? Putin is still quite powerful. He provides brutal security services. Although dissent is mercilessly crushed, Russian power has always been shaky. Tsars, generals, and presidents all held total power until they abruptly stopped. The pressure to find a replacement will only increase if fuel shortages persist, inflation spikes, and elites lose faith in Putin's ability to safeguard their money. It might not originate from street demonstrators. It could originate from billionaires, generals, or intelligence chiefs inside the Kremlin itself who determined that the man who pledged stability is now the main cause of upheaval. On the surface, fuel shortages could appear insignificant in comparison to geopolitics and conflict. However, history demonstrates that the strongest barriers are frequently brought down by the slightest fissures. This is more than just gasoline for Putin. It has to do with the appearance of control, and it's challenging to restore once individuals realize that delusion. Already, Russian reporters are not afraid to challenge him. People are complaining more loudly, Elites are weighing their alternatives. Furthermore, the prospect of life after Putin no longer seems unattainable for the first time in decades. It's the simple truth. You have authority over the judiciary, the media, and even the army. However, a nation that is unable to replenish its gas tank is uncontrollable. We appreciate your time, and please remember to like and subscribe. It is really beneficial to us.